Molly McLaren was a young, ambitious girl who aspired to build a happy future despite the challenges that came her way. She never expected that one ill-fated Tinder date would turn into a real nightmare for her. As a 23-year-old student at the University of Kent, Molly could always count on the support of her loved ones and friends. This helped shape her as an individual, achieve success in her studies, and be popular on social media. The girl dreamed of becoming a famous personal trainer and making a positive impact in the fitness world. Despite battling eating disorders and anxiety in her teenage years, Molly made every effort to overcome these issues. Health, both physical and mental, was a top priority for her. She sought to inspire others who found themselves in similar situations through her example, sharing knowledge and resources with those struggling with eating disorders. Family and friends always described Molly as a source of optimism, joy, and kindness. She seemed to radiate warmth and light to everyone she interacted with. The tragic events that befell the girl unfolded in Kent, a region popular among tourists and one of the wealthiest counties in Great Britain. The picturesque landscapes and enchanting nature earned the city the reputation of being the Garden of England. As a student, Molly was an active user of Tinder, the most popular dating app among single people, which allowed for quick and easy new connections. And although the girl previously never had relationships that lasted more than 6 months, in June 2016, this trend changed. While scrolling through profiles of potential partners, Molly came across 25-year-old warehouse worker Joshua Stimson, whose stunning eyes immediately caught her attention. There was an instant attraction between them, and they began sharing details about their lives. Joshua admitted that he had been struggling with a mental illness, bipolar disorder, his entire life. In response, Molly opened up about her own issues with anxiety and eating behavior. Upon learning about the ordeals the young man had gone through, the girl felt an overwhelming desire to support him. After all, her calling was to help people like him, and the attraction that had arisen between them was too strong to ignore. It seemed to Molly that she and Joshua had known each other for a lifetime. So she suggested to him that they pretend to have known each other much longer than just a few days. The young couple began actively communicating on social media, and after a few months, in November, they finally had their first date. At that point, the passion between them flared up with renewed vigor. When Molly introduced Joshua to her parents, they did not welcome him as warmly as she had hoped. The girl's mother sensed a threat emanating from the young man. The fact that he suffered from bipolar disorder frightened Molly's mother, as she did not want her daughter to find herself in the same depressed state she had once experienced. But despite everything, her mom supported Molly's decision, considering her mature enough for a serious relationship. The lovers could not bear to be apart for more than a few days. It seemed there were genuine, sincere feelings between them. But this idyll lasted only until the end of the honeymoon phase. It was time to at least partially return to reality. Molly saw her future together with Joshua, considering him an important part of her life, but unfortunately, the young man did not share this vision of their budding relationship. Gradually, Joshua became more and more controlling, constantly wanting to know where Molly was, where she was going, and what she was doing. His obsession with the girl reached such a level that he quit his job to spend every free moment with his beloved. Even when Molly was busy with her studies and did not want to see Joshua, he still showed up, causing her to become disillusioned with what their relationship had become. The girl had barely managed to stabilize her mental and physical state after struggling with disorders, and now she sought to keep everything under control on her own, rather than being controlled by her boyfriend. At the same time, Molly understood how fragile Joshua's psyche was, so she did not dare to break off the relationship, despite her inner turmoil. In early 2017, their relationship began to crack. Molly found out that Joshua had been secretly photographing and filming her, which made her feel exposed and completely deprived of control over her own body. The confused girl turned to her mother for advice. Later, recalling that situation, Molly would recount that throughout all the altercations, Joshua remained incredibly impassive. He felt no remorse for the photos and videos he had taken and did not even believe he had done anything wrong. That same year, Molly finally mustered the courage to break up with Joshua, but he did not accept it. The young man began to stalk her, constantly calling, sending messages, and even showing up at her work unannounced. It seemed to Molly that she would never be able to get rid of him, and this made the girl fear for her life. On June 7, 2017, Molly went to Kent's gym in Chatham, Kent. She had just finished her shift at the clinic and decided to work out before heading home. When the girl entered the gym, Joshua was already waiting for her inside. Molly instantly texted her mother, informing her that Joshua had come to the gym and that she was alone with him. In response, her mother immediately called her daughter and ordered her to urgently grab her things and leave without looking back. Molly did just that. She quickly gathered her belongings and headed to her car. On the way, the girl texted her friends, complaining that she now constantly had to look over her shoulder. Unfortunately, this message would be Molly's last. Upon arriving at the parking lot near the gym, Kent police saw a scene resembling one from a horror movie. Numerous passers-by had witnessed the brutal attack on Molly. The driver's side door was open, and 75 stab wounds were counted on the girl's body. Benjamin Morton was the one who called the police. He tried to stop the attacker and prevent him from fleeing the crime scene. The man kicked the assailant in the car door and attempted to pull him away from Molly. But the madman's attack could not be stopped. When the police arrived at the scene, the attacker suddenly moved towards them. Completely calm, he wiped the bloody splatters from his face and asked the officers, "Did you want to see me?" To the horror of the police, the attacker turned out to be the same man they had received a call about earlier that month. It was Joshua Stimpson. Morton tried to bring Molly back to consciousness after the terrible attack, but to no avail. It was officially announced that the girl's life had ended at 11:40 a.m. due to a neck injury. Joshua's arrest did not require extraordinary efforts from the police. The man confessed to the crime he had committed but emphasized that he had acted unintentionally. According to him, he was so depressed by the rejection from the girl that he decided to cope with this pain in the only way he knew, by taking Molly's life. The trial of Joshua began in early 2018. He steadfastly adhered to his version of events, and his defense claimed the same. The lawyers insisted that the man had been unable to cope with his emotional pain, and such a radical way of solving the problem was dictated by his mental disorders. They claimed that Joshua had been significantly affected by his parents' divorce and his mother's subsequent abandonment. Throughout his life, he had repeatedly undergone treatment in psychiatric clinics, trying to overcome his excessive sensitivity to rejection, and in the opinion of the defense, a personality disorder. With these statements, the defense sought to prove that Joshua did not possess sufficient mental capacity to plan the crime, and his actions went beyond normal cognitive functionality. However, the prosecution was able to provide compelling counterarguments. Prosecutors presented footage from surveillance cameras confirming that Joshua had purchased the knife used to kill Molly just a few days before the crime. Moreover, if Joshua had been so exhausted by the pain of rejection, why had he waited several weeks before committing this terrible act? Nothing about this attack indicated a lack of self-control or impulsiveness of actions. However, the defense's arguments regarding Joshua's mental state remained an important factor that needed to be taken into account. Therefore, the prosecution involved a psychiatrist to assess Joshua's condition. According to him, there was no evidence that the defendant suffered from a personality disorder or any other mental defects. Instead, the expert suggested that Joshua had narcissistic traits and showed absolutely no remorse for the crime he had committed. At the time of the closing arguments, it still remained unclear which side had the upper hand. Molly's mother and other family members were probably in a state of anxiety. Only after 3 hours of deliberation did the jury finally announce the verdict, and Molly's family and friends breathed a sigh of relief. Joshua Stimpson was found guilty of the intentional brutal attack on Molly McLaren. Judge Adela Williams sentenced Joshua to at least 26 years in prison, noting that he was a very dangerous person and women would not be safe as long as he was at large. She expressed hope that Joshua would never be released after what he had done to Molly, her family, and her future. Molly's family released an official statement thanking the eyewitnesses for their courage and attempts to save the girl's life. Regarding the trial, they noted that the verdict brought them some relief. But now they would always feel the loss, and although Molly's light had gone out, the memory of her would continue to warm their hearts. After the trial, Molly's family established a charitable foundation in her name. This organization was designed to bring to life the girl's dreams, which had been cut short too soon. Every year, the foundation holds a large-scale event filled with games, delicious food, and fun. The funds raised are used to support charitable organizations that help people with eating disorders. Since the foundation's establishment, over £30,000 have been raised. All of this is for the sake of Molly's goals: positivity, confidence, and change. Transforming the most horrific events into rays of light for the whole world. On a worrying Tuesday in September 2017, 31-year-old teacher Laura Wallen failed to show up for work at Wild Lake High School in Maryland, USA, which was highly unusual for her. Attempts to reach Laura were futile, she was not answering her calls. Concerned colleagues decided to contact her loved ones, but they also had no idea where the woman could be. Fruitless efforts to get in touch with Laura prompted her family to turn to law enforcement. Laura Wallen was exceptionally dedicated to her profession and students. She constantly strived for professional growth, attending various courses and trainings. Her efforts were recognized in 2016 when she received the honorary title of Teacher of the Year. Laura enthusiastically awaited the start of the new school year, so her absence on the first day of classes in 2017 caused serious concern for everyone who knew her. Upon receiving the missing person report for Laura, police officers headed to her residence in Olney, Maryland, to check for any clues. The house was locked, and neighbors reported that the woman lived alone. A thorough inspection of the surrounding area and windows revealed no signs of Laura's presence or any traces of struggle or break-in. Everything indicated that she had simply gone somewhere. The investigation took a new turn when detectives learned that Laura was in a relationship with a man named Tyler Tessier and was 4 months pregnant. This further heightened the alarm for her safety and the well-being of her unborn child. It was crucial to find the woman as soon as possible. Attempts to track Laura's whereabouts via her cell phone were unsuccessful, the device was turned off. Investigators contacted Tyler Tessier, but he claimed to have no idea where his girlfriend could be. Such behavior seemed suspicious. Why would the father of the future child not only not know where his pregnant beloved was but also not show much concern about it? The police discovered that Laura's car was missing from her house. Soon, the vehicle, a black 2011 Ford Escape, was found parked near the school where the missing woman worked. The vehicle had no visible damage and was empty. No traces of violence or struggle were found inside, nothing suspicious that could shed light on the owner's whereabouts. The search area focused around the place where Laura's car was found. Not only the woman's family and colleagues joined the efforts but also concerned citizens. People distributed flyers urging anyone to report any information about the woman. Law enforcement officers thoroughly searched the missing person's home but found nothing there that could hint at her whereabouts. Everything was in its place, nothing aroused suspicion. Detectives set about reconstructing the last days before Laura's disappearance. It became known that on September 1st, she met with her family, and the next day, September 2nd, she went somewhere with her partner Tyler. The investigation later established that on that day, Laura sent a message to her sister mentioning that Tyler was taking her somewhere out of town, but she did not know the details of this trip. The last recorded transaction from the woman's card was a purchase at a Safeway supermarket located near her home in Olney on the evening of September 2nd. Surveillance camera footage showed that Laura was not alone when making the purchase, Tyler was with her. No other information about the missing woman's movements or actions could be established. The missing person report was filed on September 5th, so it was clear that Laura disappeared between September 2nd and September 5th. The last person to see her was Tyler. Laura and Tyler's parents held a press conference on television, during which they asked anyone who had any information about the possible whereabouts of the missing woman to report it to the police. They promised a $25,000 reward for valuable information. However, Tyler himself did not participate in the press conference or join the search for the girl, which raised concern and suspicion among law enforcement. His behavior was strange, resembling indifference. Later, under public pressure and due to general suspicion towards him, Tyler finally faced the journalists. He said that he had known Laura for about 10 years. Addressing the cameras, the man said, "Laura, if you hear me, know this, it doesn't matter what happened or what problems we have. We can sort everything out together. So many people miss you and are waiting for your return. We're not sleeping, not eating, just praying that you're okay." Despite Tyler's calls for Laura to come back and his pleas to the public to report any information about her, the girl's family and the police were skeptical of his words. They no longer trusted him, sensing falsehood in his appeal. Tyler's behavior was unnatural and contrived. Detectives decided to interrogate the missing woman's partner, hoping to obtain valuable information from him. Unexpectedly for everyone, the man changed his previous testimony. He stated that shortly before her disappearance, Laura came to him and asked for help to vanish. She confessed to Tyler that she was pregnant not by him, but by one of her students. Laura was very concerned about this situation, realizing that if the truth came out, her reputation would be ruined. Therefore, she allegedly decided to run away and wait it out somewhere. Tyler insisted that Laura was fine and there was no need to look for her, it was better to leave the girl alone. But the investigators did not believe this version of events. They knew that Laura worked with elementary school students, so the likelihood of her having an relationship with a child seemed absurd. Moreover, during the examination of the missing woman's house, the police noticed that all her personal belongings, documents, clothes, money, bank cards, and wallet, remained in place. If the woman were planning to escape, she would have definitely taken these necessary items with her. Additional doubts were raised by the information obtained by detectives from Laura's bank. It turned out that after her disappearance, no transactions were made with her card. And since the woman had always paid by card before, the investigators wondered, how could she travel without money? Even more light was shed on the situation by data from Laura's medical insurance. She stopped visiting her doctor, who was monitoring her pregnancy, although she took her health and the condition of her future child very seriously. All these facts did not fit into the story of voluntary disappearance, instead, they increasingly compromised Tyler. The suspicious attitude of the investigation towards him intensified due to a series of contradictory testimonies and strange behavior. Then the detectives decided to track Tyler's movements using his cell phone. It turned out that on the eve of Laura's disappearance, he visited a remote wooded area several times. This information prompted the police to organize a thorough search in the specified territory. Canine handlers with service dogs trained to search for corpses were involved in the operation in the forest. It was thanks to these animals that a freshly dug grave was discovered in a secluded place on September 13th. In a shallow pit lay the body of a woman, who was soon identified as the missing Laura Wallen. Forensic experts established that death was caused by a gunshot wound to the back of the head. DNA analysis of the unborn child showed that the father was indeed Tyler, not one of the students, as he had tried to present. Not far from the burial site, the murdered woman's cell phone was found. All the evidence pointed to Tyler's involvement in the crime. He was the last person to see Laura alive. He had repeatedly been to the area of the forest where the body was found, and he had been telling the investigation various tales. The detectives were ready to detain the suspect, but they needed a possible motive. Studying the relationship between Tyler and Laura, law enforcement officers learned that over the 10 years of their acquaintance, the couple had broken up and gotten back together several times. The relationship was complicated, but despite all the hardships, Laura was sincerely happy about her future motherhood. The same could not be said about Tyler. It turned out that in parallel with his relationship with Laura, he had an affair with another teacher, whom he met back in 2012. Tyler even lived with his mistress but told Laura that he was at work. At that time, neither woman was aware of the existence of a rival. Upon learning about the pregnancy, Laura was overwhelmingly happy, as she loved children very much and dreamed of having her own. She immediately shared this joyful news with her family. Laura's father, knowing about his daughter's difficult relationship with Tyler and rumors of his infidelity, was wary of the situation. He decided to talk to his future son-in-law and find out his intentions. Tyler assured Laura's father that he was very serious, eagerly awaiting the birth of the child, and promised to take care of his beloved. To dispel any doubts, he even showed the man an engagement ring, hinting that he planned to propose to Laura at the first opportunity. Tyler dismissed all rumors that he was seeing someone else. However, the detectives found out that the engagement ring Tyler had shown to the murdered woman's father as proof of his serious intentions, he later used to propose to another woman. That teacher accepted the proposal, and the lovers set about preparing for the wedding, choosing a dress for the bride, thinking through the decor for the celebration hall, and so on. The wedding date was set for just a month after Laura's planned delivery. It remained a mystery how exactly Tyler was going to get out of this love triangle. It is quite possible that the idea of murder had been brewing in his head long before the tragic events, although it is not excluded that everything happened spontaneously. One way or another, both women were unaware of each other's existence for a long time and believed that they were the only ones in Tyler's life. However, some time before her disappearance, Laura did find out about the rival her lover was planning to marry. On August 29, she wrote a message to Tyler asking for a meeting. "We absolutely need to meet and clarify some points. I think if you were in my place, you would also want to get answers to certain questions. This is not an attempt to confront, I just want to hear your explanations." A face-to-face conversation, woman to woman. The police tended to believe that it was this attempt by Laura to clarify the situation that proved fatal for her. Realizing that the exposure of his double life would lead to an inevitable scandal, Tyler managed to convince his fiancée that the pregnant Laura was just an obsessive ex-girlfriend who could not let him go and was openly stalking him. He even let slip that he would not mind getting rid of her, but the bride took these words as an emotional outburst, not a real intention. In fact, Laura's actions infuriated Tyler so much that he began to hatch a plan to eliminate her. Now the investigators had no doubts about the motive, and the suspect was arrested. During the interrogation, he initially denied not only his guilt but also the fact of parallel relations with another woman. But when the detectives presented irrefutable evidence, Tyler had to admit the betrayal, although he still denied involvement in the murder. According to the investigation, on September 2, Tyler took Laura for a walk in the woods. The woman's sister even received a message from her about this trip and a request to send a photo of the picturesque place where they found themselves. Laura took a picture, and later the police were able to match it with the location where the body was subsequently found. This area was well known to Tyler, as it was located not far from the farm where he worked. The man told Laura that he intended to buy a plot of land there and build a house for their future family. The woman was delighted at the prospect of having a spacious, cozy home and shared the joyful news with her sister. The next day, September 3, Tyler took Laura to the woods again, supposedly to take another look at the coveted plot. She had no idea that she was actually heading towards her own death. Waiting for the woman to turn away, the insidious lover shot her in the back of the head, not even daring to look into her eyes. The same day, he contacted a friend, asking to pick him up late in the evening from the residential complex where Laura's car was parked and take him to Baltimore. The friend refused, noting that it was not worth going on such a long journey in the middle of the night. In response, Tyler uttered a mysterious phrase, "Maybe you're right. I'm just trying to put things in order." In conclusion, he also asked his friend not to disclose this conversation. The detectives assumed that the killer, having buried Laura's body, set about destroying the evidence. He drove the victim's car to the city and left it near the school where she worked, hoping to confuse the investigation. Then he began sending messages to the deceased woman's relatives, designed to throw them off track. In particular, from the phone of the already dead Laura, he wrote to her sister, "I'm 95% sure that the child's father is not Tyler. I'm trying to contact Antoine." Relatives, who had a trusting relationship with Laura, were extremely surprised by such a message. They knew for sure that the woman did not cheat on her chosen one, and if she had cheated, it would certainly not have been with a student named Antoine. But even if we assume that Laura had reason to doubt Tyler's paternity, she would have told her sister about it in person, not through a messenger. In the end, it turned out that about a year ago, during another break in her relationship with Tyler, the woman had indeed dated someone named Antoine, but that short-lived romance lasted a very short time. Since then, Laura had no further contact with that man, so he could not possibly be the father of her unborn child. This was later confirmed by DNA testing. Tyler was charged with first-degree murder, as well as obstruction of justice, falsification of evidence, and giving false testimony. However, it was impossible to also charge him with the murder of the unborn child, since under the laws of the state of Maryland, the fetus must be viable at the time of the mother's death. Under the pressure of evidence, the suspect eventually confessed to the crime, though he presented several contradictory versions of events. At first, he claimed that on September 4th, he and Laura had a heated argument, during which he announced his intention to break up. The woman allegedly cried hysterically and then attacked him with scissors. Dodging the blow, Tyler pushed her. Laura fell from the porch steps and went limp. Thinking she was dead, the man took the body to the woods and buried it there. This version, however, was refuted by the autopsy results, which indicated death from a bullet. Then the accused made up a new story. Allegedly, while burying Laura, he suddenly became afraid that she was still alive and would suffer in the grave, so he decided to end her torment by shooting her out of mercy. After talking to a lawyer, Tyler changed this version as well. Now he claimed that on that fateful day, unknown African Americans broke into Laura's house and kidnapped them both, took them to the woods, shot the woman, and released him alive, taking pity on his pleas. Despite all these attempts to justify himself, the prosecutor's office had no doubt about Tyler's guilt. The time of reckoning for the crime was approaching, and the defendant was well aware of this. The double life he had carefully hidden for several years was about to be exposed, as Laura had learned the truth and began corresponding with his fiancé. It was this carelessness that signed her death warrant. It is noteworthy that on the weekend of September 2nd, when the murder took place, Tyler was supposed to spend time with his fiancée in Pennsylvania, helping her choose dresses for the bridesmaids. Instead, he lied that he had injured his knee while walking the dog and could not endure a long trip. In fact, there was nothing wrong with his health. The man was simply implementing his sinister plan. The prosecution insisted that the murder of Laura was not spontaneous. Tyler had carefully planned it. This is evidenced by at least the fact that he twice brought the pregnant woman to a remote forest area. Probably, the first time he simply did not have the courage to take the life of his beloved. Tyler carefully selected the place for the massacre, a deaf corner, a hideout in the forest, which can be reached only after several hours of driving off-road in an all-wheel drive SUV, followed by an ascent and descent on steep slopes. The pregnant Laura twice overcame this difficult and exhausting route, having no idea that she was heading towards her death. The prosecutor insisted on life imprisonment without the right to early release, but this sentence was not destined to come true. On the morning of September 6, 2018, just hours before the start of the court hearing, Tyler was found dead in his cell. He committed suicide, leaving 5 suicide notes on the bunk bed. Commenting on this event, the prosecutor bitterly noted, "This morning we lost the opportunity to present to the public the true course and details of this horrific crime." At the same time, no one should have any doubt that it was Tyler who killed Laura. He knew perfectly well that he would be found guilty because we had irrefutable evidence against him. Realizing the inevitability of punishment, he decided to act like a coward. Tyler led a psychopathic double life, and his ability to lie can only be compared to his ability to breathe. Despite the outrage at such an outcome, Laura's family found solace in the fact that her killer escaped human justice by his death. Our world is full of mysteries and riddles that sometimes hide right beside us. Today, we will tell you a story about how ordinary life events can turn into a real nightmare for some people. Do vows and promises truly have power? How meaningful are the oaths taken by newlyweds or doctors? This story vividly demonstrates that for certain individuals, such words mean nothing, and the trust of others can be destroyed by fatal acts and murders. In early 1998, Major Jean-Paul Zawadzki, the chief flight engineer of military aviation, returned from a long assignment in Gabon, where he actively participated in military operations. Finally, after many months of separation, he was able to see his wife Nicole and their 10-year-old daughter. The family lived in the small town of Souche in the Loire department, near the military base where Jean-Paul served. He had 3 weeks of rest ahead of him to regain his strength before returning to duty. However, shortly after his arrival, the health of the military engineer began to deteriorate rapidly. He developed fatigue and cough. When the first symptoms of illness appeared, his wife bought cold medicine recommended by their family doctor, Michel Piron. He assumed that the man's body was simply adapting after the hot and dry climate of Africa. However, the situation did not improve. Within a month, Jean-Paul's eyes turned red, he began vomiting, and diarrhea appeared. In this condition, the major could not return to service, so he was forced to ask for an extension of his leave. On February 14, the man's health worsened again, and his wife once more called the family doctor to their home. Jean-Paul was asked to take tests and was prescribed new medications. Although blood tests did not reveal anything serious, the man's condition was extremely grave. More than a month had passed since his return from Africa, but the officer's health continued to deteriorate rapidly. The once strong and athletic man could barely stand on his feet and was short of breath from the slightest physical exertion. The family doctor was struck by the changes that had occurred in his patient. The man who had always been active in sports now barely moved around the house, hunched over and hiding his reddened eyes behind dark glasses. The last visit to the doctor took place on March 8. Michel Piron concluded that the deterioration of Jean-Paul's health was caused by overwork and stress after participating in the military mission. In his opinion, the body should recover over time, and the man would be able to return to his normal life. To speed up the recovery, the doctor insisted on extending the leave and taking the prescribed medications. Jean-Paul followed the advice, but it was too late. On March 11, Nicole Zawadzki turned to her mother-in-law with the tragic news that her husband had suddenly died. Jean-Paul, the son of Polish immigrants, had dreamed of the sky since childhood. He managed to fulfill his dream by joining the military service. At the age of 21, he met Nicole in a nightclub, and feelings immediately flared up between them. Their relationship had lasted for 18 years, and the couple was raising a 10-year-old daughter. It was unclear how a 39-year-old soldier in the prime of his life could deteriorate so quickly without apparent reasons. And 2 months after returning from another business trip, he suddenly passed away. Initially, the attending physician claimed that the cause of the sharp deterioration in health could be stress and physical exertion experienced by the major during the mission in Africa. It was known that during this period, he also trained intensively. It was assumed that Jean-Paul died as a result of overexertion and a subsequent heart attack. But there was every reason to believe that the doctor was unable to establish the true reasons for the deterioration of the soldier's condition and death. The death certificate stated that Jean-Paul died of natural causes. On March 16, the serviceman's body was buried. The widow, struck by the grief of loss, turned to the military command with a request for the pilot friends to deliver the body of her beloved husband to the farewell ceremony, which was to take place in his native region of Châteauneuf-sur-Cher. A huge crowd of relatives, friends, and military colleagues with whom Major Zawadzki had served shoulder to shoulder gathered to pay their respects to the deceased. They were all united not only by friendly relations with Jean-Paul but also by surprise that such a healthy and strong person could suddenly die like that. The man had always been in excellent physical shape and had never had any health problems before. For no apparent reason, he simply went on vacation in a great mood, completely healthy, and here is such a tragic end that shocked all his loved ones. When relatives and fellow servicemen recovered from the bitterness of loss, everyone who knew the major began to be tormented by the question, what really happened? Jean-Paul was known as a true professional and a reliable comrade. He had an impeccable reputation at the military base among his colleagues and superiors. The man was known for his dedication to sports, which had made him a real muscle machine. Jean-Paul had always been noted for his robust health. Interestingly, just a few weeks before leaving for the mission in Gabon, he successfully passed an in-depth medical examination with all the necessary tests. And immediately before returning home, his well-being did not raise any doubts in anyone. What could have happened to the brave officer after returning to his homeland? The military leadership also became interested in this issue. Having familiarized themselves with the case of Major Zawadzki's death, the command immediately doubted the competence of his doctor. In fact, he was unable to clearly establish the cause of death and did not make a diagnosis, although he referred to some kind of illness. Against the background of other facts, this looked extremely suspicious. Serious questions arose about Dr. Michel Piron. The 49-year-old doctor was considered a fairly experienced specialist and had been in private practice for over 20 years. For many years, he was a local Esculapius devoted to his work, who practically lived at work, tirelessly caring for his patients. The doctor had a crystal-clear reputation. He was considered an excellent psychologist who understood people at a glance. But over the past year, the doctor had clearly lost ground, and it seemed that something was weighing on him and distracting him. The man had befriended the Zawadzki family, and it appeared that he was paying much more attention to them than to his other clients. It was found out that Michel Piron regularly visited Nicole, although the woman was completely healthy. Rumors spread throughout the small town where the couple lived. Many neighbors of the family repeatedly noticed the doctor's car near the Zawadzki house when the soldier was not at home. He often came with flowers and other gifts, which led to thoughts about an extramarital affair with Nicole. After these details became known, public attention focused on the behavior of the widow. Many people noted that she behaved strangely during the funeral ceremony and in the days following her husband's death. It might seem that the tragedy did not particularly affect her. Shortly after Jean-Paul's death, his wife became the owner of an expensive BMW car. This also caused surprise, because the family already had an ordinary car that Nicole could freely use, and they hardly had the money for such a purchase. Observers noted that by her behavior, the woman did not at all resemble a grief-stricken widow. Suspicions gradually began to arise that the major's death might not have been accidental and that his own wife was somehow involved in it. The mechanics at the air base and everyone who worked closely with Jean-Paul also actively discussed his early demise. The military could not believe that he just up and died like that. Rumors spread throughout the base and eventually reached the ears of the colonel, the commander of the air base. He also noticed that the major was completely healthy and was being treated by an experienced doctor, so his death seemed not only strange but also extremely suspicious. And when information reached him that the family doctor might be Madame Zawadzki's lover, the suspicions only intensified. Eventually, the colonel made the decision to turn to law enforcement. 2 months after Jean-Paul's death, on May 14, 1998, he summoned the gendarmes and told them about his suspicions. The commander was most interested in the mysterious illness, which for unknown reasons could not be properly diagnosed by a doctor with more than 20 years of experience, who was also the widow's lover. The colonel stated that he was extremely concerned about the situation and feared a possible threat to his other subordinates. He did not make direct accusations and did not rush to call Jean-Paul's death a murder, but he expressed serious doubts about what had happened. At the very least, the commander wanted to make sure that the insidious disease would not take anyone else. The gendarmes themselves became interested in Nicole's behavior, as well as the conclusions of the doctor who, as it turned out, was her lover. It was decided to start an investigation. At that time, there were no strong grounds for suspicion yet. Of course, the woman had drastically changed her life immediately after her husband's death. Undoubtedly, her connection with Dr. Michel continued, but this fact alone was not enough to consider her a murderer. However, the purchase of almost the most expensive car, when the widow was not working anywhere, could be considered a financial motive. Apparently, she spent her husband's money on it. Nicole clearly could not afford such a purchase with her own funds, which she virtually did not have. It was established that Jean-Paul had 2 insurance policies, with a total payout exceeding 1 million francs. Nicole applied for this money immediately after her husband's funeral and received it. Shortly after that, she began to spend actively. She bought a car, furniture, and started a large-scale renovation of the house. When examining the family's financial condition, the police noticed large debts that had accumulated. Nicole had not paid them off, and by the time the investigation began, only a small fraction of the insurance payout remained. There was no longer enough money to pay off overdue bills. Jean-Paul did not know about the debts, because his wife, who was not working anywhere and lived solely on her husband's earnings, handled all the financial issues in the family. Of course, the accumulated debts indicated that Nicole was managing the soldiers' considerable income unwisely. Obviously, she was spending money somewhere but hiding it. This fact allowed confirming the investigators' suspicions. Now the woman had a motive. It was quite possible that her husband's death allowed her to avoid exposure of financial fraud and improve her material situation. Of course, all these guesses had yet to be proven or disproven during the investigation. The gendarmes managed to gain access to Nicole's mobile phone and found out that on the night of March 10 to 11th, a whole series of calls took place between her and the doctor. Their communication lasted until the very hour of Jean-Paul's death, which was recorded at 1500 hours on March 11, 1998. The medic indicated natural causes of death, mentioned some kind of illness, but did not bother to describe the details in detail. It seemed as if he was deliberately hiding something. Now the law enforcement officers had 2 possible lines of work. The gendarmes could simply look for the causes of death, but this gave relatively little room for action within the framework of a criminal investigation. Or this death could be treated as murder, then the police would have more authority. It was the second option that the prosecutor chose, which made it possible to obtain the right to exhume the body, as well as the corresponding warrants. The problem was that due to the testimony of the deceased's attending physician, an autopsy by a forensic expert was avoided. Considering that Jean-Paul had been in the ground for over 2 months, action had to be taken quickly. The investigators put forward the assumption that poisoning was used as a method of murder. On June 2, 1998, Jean-Paul's remains were exhumed. Unexpectedly, at the same time, the widow appeared at the cemetery, allegedly wanting to pray at the grave of her deceased husband. Her presence seemed strange, because the woman had never shown much grief over the loss before. But despite this, the gendarmes did their job. At this point, the detectives again drew attention to Nicole's suspicious behavior. She did not shed tears and seemed completely indifferent. Instead, she felt nauseous when Jean-Paul's body was pulled out of the ground. This could be a reaction to stress, because now she realized that her insidious plans might be exposed. The woman was clearly worried that she would have to answer for what she had done. Immediately after the exhumation, 40-year-old Nicole was arrested on suspicion of murder. She was put in a patrol car and taken away from the cemetery. The widow understood what was going on, so she could take countermeasures to protect herself. That is why it was decided to take her into custody. There was a possibility that she might commit suicide or warn the doctor about the danger. 49-year-old Michel was also detained and taken to the gendarmerie station. The widow and her lover were interrogated separately. At about the same time, Jean-Paul's body ended up on the forensic expert's table, who immediately began the autopsy. The specialist needed time for a thorough analysis of the remains, so he personally asked to keep the suspects in custody for as long as possible. The gendarmes did not rush with tricky questions but simply watched the behavior of the detainees. Nicole seemed to not fully realize what was happening. She spoke at length about the last day of her husband's life, recalled that he woke up and had a good breakfast. According to the woman, he was in a good mood that morning and looked better than in the previous days. Therefore, his sudden death came as a complete surprise to her. And yet Nicole did not see anything strange in this, although she was unable to explain why. By the end of the same day, the autopsy was completed. The forensic expert noted that approximately on the day of death, the major fell into a coma, as evidenced by the post-mortem state of his brain. In view of this fact, the widow's testimony was questionable. If he was really in this state, then he could not have had breakfast and looked good at all. All this contradicted Nicole's words and indicated that the woman was clearly hiding something. Her husband felt very bad throughout the day of March 11th. It is quite possible that the deterioration occurred a day before that. It is unlikely that the wife or the doctor, who often visited the house, could not notice this. But then why did they not make any calls for emergency medical care? Why didn't they take the man to the hospital? The prosecutor's office was convinced that it knew the answer. The couple wanted the soldier to die. This news finally convinced law enforcement that Jean-Paul had died from poisoning committed by his wife, and the doctor had covered for his mistress, or even directed her actions. Now it remained to wait for the results of the toxicological examination, which usually takes a little more time. They showed that for 2 months, Jean-Paul had been poisoned with an explosive mixture of several medicinal drugs, which, when combined, turned out to be extremely toxic. The same cough syrup that his wife had given her husband immediately after his return from Africa, in combination with other medications prescribed by the doctor, had a devastating effect on a healthy body. But this was only one item on the list of poisons found in the victim's body. The police managed to crack the doctor quite quickly. The man agreed to tell everything that had happened. His story began at 22:30 and lasted until 4:30 in the morning the next day. Michel started from the very beginning, from that long-ago meeting with Nicole Zawadzki, which changed his life forever. Their relationship began 7 years ago when Michel and Nicole met. At that time, he was visiting his patient who lived near the couple's house. The heroes of this story accidentally crossed glances, and a spark immediately flared up between them. At that time, Nicole's husband was participating in military operations and once again went on a several-month business trip. The lovers began to meet several times a week. Gradually, the doctor became the family therapist and then a trusted person of the Zawadzki family. Once at midnight, Nicole called the doctor and asked him to come immediately. When Michel arrived at their house, he saw a woman lying on the floor, curled up in a ball. She was crying and said that she had been physically abused by Jean-Paul. Moreover, the soldier's wife claimed that her husband. According to her, this happened all the time. The woman played on pity. The lover was increasingly worried about his beloved's family life. According to Nicole, the major was cruel to their 10-year-old daughter. The kind-hearted doctor made every effort to support the soldier's wife and the girl, and managed to find a common language with both. The child even drew his portraits, which the mother passed on. Michel gradually gained the favor of his mistress's relatives. He became friends with Aunt Julie, who also often spoke with him on the phone. The woman confirmed the stories about Nicole's ill treatment by her husband. She assured that she was terribly worried about her niece, about her health and even her life. In her opinion, there were good reasons for this. She said that once in a fit of rage, the major broke his wife's arm, and this was far from an isolated case. Eventually, Nicole began to call the family doctor several times a day at any hour. Even if the woman called at 3 in the morning, she could complain for an hour. Each time she had a new story about how Jean-Paul beat her and bullied the child. It seems that she began to exhaust her lover. there could be 10 to 30 calls per night. It was clear that the doctor, who worked without days off, needed a full rest. Calls every 10 to 15 minutes were exhausting. Michel did not get enough sleep and walked around tired. Only on the day of the Major's death, 6 outgoing calls from the doctor to Nicole were recorded, and she called him more than 300 times. This relationship had so exhausted Michel that many patients did not recognize him. The doctor was physically and emotionally drained. He was very worried about Nicole and her daughter, horrified at the thought that something might happen to them. Patients noticed that he was almost not interested in their problems and fell asleep on the go. The man himself admitted that he had become too absorbed in the troubles of the Zawadzki family. In the end, over the 7 years of this extramarital affair, Nicole managed to completely convince her lover that Jean-Paul was a cruel tyrant. The woman so engrossed Michel's every thought that he even left his wife and 3 children for her. Now the only obstacle on the path to their boundless love was the soldier. Shortly before the tragedy, Nicole told Michel that she had decided to file a report on domestic violence and begin the divorce process. But, according to her, the bureaucratic red tape greatly slowed down the case. She begged him to save her and her daughter from her aunt. All 3 of them wrote notes to the doctor asking for help. Gradually, Michel came to the only possible conclusion, in his opinion, murder. Having become accustomed to this idea, he suggested making a lethal injection of a substance that, in combination with others, is a powerful poison capable of causing almost instant death in a large dose. But it would be too obvious, so the conspirators decided to act more carefully. Luckily for the poisoner and her accomplice, after returning from Africa, Jean-Paul developed a cough. That's when they added the first drops of poison. The doctor developed a mixture that was supposed to have a slow and exhausting effect on the body, and at the right moment, a fatal injection was planned. The plan was put into action on February 11th, when after another dose of medication, Jean-Paul lost consciousness and the opportune moment arrived. But the doctor admitted that he could not kill the man with this injection, he lacked the courage. On February 14th, Nicole tried to poison Jean-Paul with another substance. It caused nausea, diarrhea, and reddening of the eyes. The doctor arrived on call and gave an injection that was supposed to alleviate the symptoms. However, the injection contained a small dose of a lethal substance. Fortunately, it was not enough. The soldier's body, strong and healthy, resisted. Then Michel prescribed pills that were supposed to cause heart problems. Under their influence, Jean-Paul did indeed begin to experience severe pain and asked for sick leave. However, he was still alive and fighting the poison. Both conspirators watched the victim's condition. Another failure required improvisation. The doctor allegedly prescribed magnesium but substituted it with 2 other drugs. It was a new deadly cocktail, but even after that, Jean-Paul continued to live. Nicole called her lover and complained that her husband did not want to die. She gave him an ultimatum: if Jean-Paul did not die, she would take her own life. So on March 4th, Michel Piron once again came to his patient, gave him magnesium, but in reality, it was another potent agent. After a few days under its influence, the major fell into a coma. On March 11th, the doctor returned to the house to give an injection that would make the coma irreversible. Having administered the drug, he took his beloved and her daughter and took them to his home for lunch. Nicole returned around 1400 hours and found her husband dead. She cleaned up the house, got rid of all the incriminating items, and called the police. As soon as this story ended, the doctor was charged with murder. He left, saying that his strong feelings for this woman had completely devastated him. Michel had become so entangled in her lies that he had stopped distinguishing between good and evil. The doctor burst into tears. But were those tears of repentance or self-pity of a caught criminal? Only Nicole could answer these questions. When the Black Widow was told that the doctor had confessed to the murder, the woman also made a counter-confession. She knew about his intentions. Nicole insisted that it was the doctor who, out of jealousy, decided to deal with her husband. She was not aware of his plans and sincerely believed that Michel was trying to cure Jean-Paul. Nicole allegedly learned about the murder only at lunch on March 11, when she and her daughter came to the doctor's house. According to the woman, at that lunch, Michel gave her detailed instructions on how to behave if they were detained. She had no choice but to follow his plan. To prove or disprove this testimony, more information was needed. Perhaps the murder was conceived and carried out by the doctor himself, or maybe the woman was his accomplice for several months. In search of new data, the gendarmes searched the new car that Nicole had purchased after her husband's death. Numerous messages from banks and bailiffs were found in it. The family's financial situation turned out to be even worse than previously thought. Nicole was facing prosecution for debts. So the woman had a strong motive for murder. Further searches were carried out at the doctor's house. There they managed to find drawings that the major's daughter had allegedly sent. Criminologists doubted that these small notes and images were really made by a child. A graphologist and a psychologist were involved in the investigation and conducted an examination. With Nicole's participation, tests were carried out, the results of which proved with 100% certainty that it was she who wrote these notes, trying to forge her daughter's handwriting. It also turned out that all this time, Michel was communicating not with Aunt Julie, who did not really exist, but with Nicole herself. She simply changed her voice during phone conversations. After several years of such intense brainwashing, Michel completely lost his head because of the lies. The scale of Nicole's deception was staggering. She managed to touch the doctor with stories about how she lost her entire family due to various accidents and illnesses. Although in fact, everyone was alive. Then she played on pity with stories about beatings by her husband. For her part, she lied to Jean-Paul for years, in particular that she worked in a nursing home. But in reality, this black widow did not work anywhere and simply spent all the money that the soldier earned while constantly on business trips. Naturally, against this background, the family's financial situation deteriorated significantly. But until the last moment, Nicole managed to hide it from her husband. Unfortunately, when the threat of a lawsuit arose, Nicole realized that exposure could not be avoided. Then she could not think of anything better than to kill Jean-Paul and receive compensation for his life. Analyzing the personality of the probable criminal, psychiatrists discovered a pathological liar with very complex behavior. She was a born manipulator and fully demonstrated her skills using the doctor as an example. She managed to convince her lover that Jean-Paul was really dangerous and cruel. Although everyone who knew the soldier well denied any such assumptions. No one had ever seen bruises on the widow's body. In a conversation with the deceased's daughter, it was found out that Jean-Paul had never laid a finger on either Nicole or the girl. She described her father as a kind and loving family man. All the woman's stories turned out to be lies. She never went to the police and did not try to file for divorce. Although Michel was a murderer, at the same time he became a victim of a dangerous criminal who not only manipulated him and led him to crime but also derived great pleasure from it. However, the psychiatric examination did not reveal any abnormalities, so the woman had to stand trial and answer for her crimes to the fullest extent of the law. To unravel this whole tangle of lies, it took almost 2 years of investigation, during which the accused were held in custody without the right to bail. Finally, in June 2001, the suspects appeared before the jury. Even during the sessions, it was noticeable that Nicole continued to dominate the doctor. She was restrained and cold. She insisted on her innocence, claiming that the idea of poisoning belonged exclusively to Michel. Fortunately, the criminal's version changed once again, and the prosecutor pointed this out, quite convincingly exposing the lie. But even after that, the Black Widow continued to lie. In fact, it only worsened her position. The doctor behaved completely differently. Many witnesses vied with each other to praise him as a specialist and a person. However, this did not negate the fact that it was he who played a significant role in the murder. When the jurors returned after deliberating on the sentences, they found both defendants guilty. Nicole Zawadzki received 25 years in prison, and her lover got 20 years. The woman was furious with the court's decision. Almost immediately after that, the Black Widow decided to appeal the verdict. Since she had killed Jean-Paul together with Michel, he also faced a retrial. The new trial took place in March 2002 and lasted 4 days. As a result, Nicole's prison term was increased to 28 years. Michel's punishment was left unchanged. Both are still behind bars. Nicole once again managed to set up the majority of those around her in a way that was convenient for her. Therefore, in prison, the criminal enjoys comprehensive support. Andrew Rabila, a 26-year-old young man, seemed to have everything one could dream of: a large house, an expensive car, world travel, and a relationship with a charming model named Gracia. From the outside, their life looked idyllic, but few suspected that behind the charming smile of this attractive young man hid a terrible secret. The Rabila family lived in Perth, one of the largest cities in Australia. On May 25, 2020, a terrible tragedy occurred. Andrew's mother, Colin Rabila, died. Colin had 4 adult children, a daughter, Monica, and 3 sons, Julian, Andrew, and Fabian. The older sons, Julian and Andrew, already lived separately from their mother, while daughter Monica and youngest son Fabian still lived with her. On that fateful day, May 25, 2020, Monica and Fabian were at work. Fabian worked at a supermarket, and his shift ended at 2 p.m. He expected his mother to pick him up, as usual, and take him home. But Colin did not show up at the supermarket at the agreed time. Fabian felt that something was wrong. He tried to call his mother several times, but she did not answer. Eventually, the young man decided to get home on his own on foot. When Fabian entered the house, he immediately heard the sound of running water. The shower was on in the bathroom. The bathroom door was closed. He knocked and called out to his mother, asking if everything was okay, but there was no response. After a few minutes, Fabian dared to open the bathroom door and saw a terrible sight. His mother was lying unconscious on the floor. He immediately called an ambulance. While waiting for the paramedics to arrive, Fabian tried to resuscitate his mother, giving her artificial respiration and chest compressions as best he could. But all efforts were in vain. The woman was already dead. The paramedics who arrived could not help either. 58-year-old Colin Rabila was a wonderful and caring mother. Once, the Rabila family had a family mining business, but after Colin divorced her husband, she was left without a job. The woman single-handedly raised her children and got a job in a cafe. When the children grew up, at the age of 51, Colin earned a bachelor's degree, and then entered university, where she continued her studies in the specialty, healthcare management, policy and leadership. 2 weeks before her death, she started working in the Department of Health. Colin was happy and proud of herself, because her career was finally on the rise. Colin took care of her health, although she suffered from Hashimoto's disease, autoimmune thyroiditis, a chronic inflammation of the thyroid gland. It is also known that she had heart problems. In her free time, she did fitness and paid a lot of attention to her daughter and sons. The youngest son, Fabian, was 19 years old and, as already mentioned, worked in a supermarket. Little is known about the eldest son Julian, as he had long since moved away from his mother and lived in another city. The only daughter, Monica, outwardly looked very much like her older brother Julian. In 2020, the girl was studying to be a paramedic. On the morning of May 25, Monica talked to her mother. Colin looked healthy and did not complain about anything. The middle son, Andrew, lived with his girlfriend Gracia a few kilometers from his mother's house. Andrew and Gracia were a well-known couple on the internet. They met back in 2015 through mutual friends. 5 years later, the couple had a son, Romeo, although they were not officially married. Gracia worked as a model and was a blogger, maintained pages on social networks, published photos, videos and advertising posts, earning money from it. Andrew was involved in cryptocurrencies, considering himself an expert in this field. He claimed that he could predict market fluctuations and earn six-figure sums. But in reality, his financial situation was far from ideal. Andrew constantly lost money rather than earning it. Obviously, Gracia was the main breadwinner in the family, and Andrew only helped her a little with her blog. Judging by the fact that the couple shared their life on the internet, it was not difficult to imagine their lifestyle. In a home video shot in April 2020, you can see a large fireplace, a spacious sofa and luxurious furniture. Gracia posted videos of food and travel vlogs on her page, being the main star of her blog. Their son Romeo was in second place, and Andrew only occasionally appeared in the frame. Colin was clearly worried about Andrew's business and did not consider his work on the internet a serious matter. She said it was all temporary, popularity would pass, and what then? The woman insisted that her son should not spend all the money on expensive things, cars and travel. Outwardly, it might seem that Andrew and Gracia had everything, a big house, a white Range Rover Evoque, lots of expensive things, trips abroad. It looked like they were living a perfect life, but the reality was quite different. For example, they bought the car on credit, and the monthly payments were not easy for them. The couple did not own the house, they had no real estate or assets, their financial situation was very shaky. Compared to Andrew, Gracia had a more stable situation, and if necessary, she could earn more. Andrew, on the other hand, worked at a loss, his cryptocurrency business did not bring any profit. By May 2020, the couple had accumulated debts of over $120,000, which is approximately equivalent to $75,000. And it was in this month that Andrew's mother suddenly died. The day of May 25 began with joyful anticipation. Andrew and Gracia planned to spend time with the girl's cousin, who had come to visit them from another city. They were going to have lunch together, and Gracia was looking forward to this meeting. But everything did not go according to plan. Around 10 a.m., Andrew suddenly left the house without warning. He said nothing to anyone, just disappeared. At first Gracia was confused, but then she thought that maybe he had gone out for a short while and would be back soon. Minutes turned into hours, the girl's anxiety grew. She sent Andrew several messages, but there was no response. Between about 11:10 and 11:25, Gracia called Andrew 12 times, but no one picked up. The girl got angry and started sending him furious messages. Pick up the phone, where are you? Do you not have a phone, what's wrong with you? Answer, damn it, I'm furious, I'm so angry with you. Several hours passed. Gracia was enraged and just could not understand why Andrew had suddenly disappeared, leaving her alone with her cousin. Suddenly, around 2 p.m., Andrew returned home and, as if nothing had happened, asked the girls where they would like to go for lunch. Before going to the cafe, he sent a message to his mother to find out if she could look after their son today or tomorrow. Andrew wrote to Colin that he had things to do, so he would not be able to take care of Romeo. But his mother did not reply to his message, because at that moment she was already dead. Colin Rabila was found dead in her own home, her death was sudden and unexpected. Colin's sons and daughter were shocked by the news of their mother's death, but it never occurred to anyone that it might have happened under unnatural circumstances. Doctors knew about the woman's heart problems, so they assumed that the cause of death could be arrhythmia or even an aneurysm of the brain. In addition, Colin was diagnosed with autoimmune thyroiditis. The police officers who inspected Colin's house did not find anything suspicious, all things were in their places, nothing was missing, all windows and doors were locked, and there were no signs of intrusion by outsiders. As for the autopsy results, the exact cause of Colin Rabila's death could not be established, no injuries were found on her body. All her sons and daughter ruled out the possibility that their mother could have done something bad to herself. The woman had very recently earned a master's degree and got a new job, she was very happy and showed no signs of depression, so everyone thought that Colin died due to health problems. After the woman's death, her eldest son Julian decided to stay for several months in his native Perth. And it was he who began to notice that something was wrong with his brother Andrew. He began to behave strangely. When Julian was looking through his mother's documents, he discovered that her driver's license had disappeared somewhere. He asked his brothers and sister about it, and Andrew admitted that it was he who had taken his mother's license. After that, Andrew took the initiative to settle Colin's financial affairs, which was completely atypical for him. And later, Julian found out that his mother had several life insurance policies. None of the other relatives knew that 2 weeks before Colin's death, Andrew had taken out not 1, not 2, but 3 life insurance policies on his mother. It would seem that there was nothing strange about this, but the unusual fact was that he took out the policies not for himself, not for his girlfriend, child, brothers or sister, but only for his mother. The total amount of these life insurance policies exceeded $1 million. After his mother's death, Andrew made sure that all her mail was sent to his address, although Monica and Fabian continued to live in their mother's house. In addition, Andrew was the first person the coroner contacted by phone, and it seemed that the man was always one step ahead and kept everything under control. Soon, Colin's former psychologist called Monica and asked why forged documents had been sent to the insurance company on her behalf. Monica definitely did not send these papers. When the insurers themselves began to study the documents in detail, they noticed errors and inconsistencies and immediately suspected fraud. One of the insurance companies contacted the Western Australia police, and officers began an investigation. 5 months after Colin Rabila's death, all her children were summoned for questioning. Meanwhile, the police obtained a warrant to search Colin's house, as well as the home where Andrew and Gracia lived. That same evening, the police arrested Andrew on charges of fraud. Investigators found out that after his mother's death, the man had forged medical certificates, a will, and even a coroner's report. Andrew made himself the sole heir to all his mother's property, and his brothers and sister would not get anything. Julian, Monica and Fabian, upon learning this news, realized that Andrew had actually crossed them out of his life, and then all 3 wondered, did Andrew kill their mother? After these terrible accusations, Andrew was released on bail while detectives gathered evidence. The man hoped that the investigators would not be able to prove his guilt. As for Gracia, the model was not involved in the fraud and had nothing to do with this case. Detectives installed a listening device and a hidden camera in the couple's house. From October to December 2020, investigators listened in on conversations between Andrew and Gracia. The man repeatedly admitted that he had forged documents. Gracia knew nothing about it. The girl said to Andrew, "What have you done? Because of you, we ended up in shit. Why did you do it? It's so stupid of you." Gracia also expressed concern that she would be left a single mother. She asked, "And what are you going to do next, run away?" Andrew replied, "I didn't think this would happen. I'm not going to jail. I'll get my money and then leave the country." While the investigation was ongoing, Andrew continued to live his usual life at large. He lived in a luxurious house with Gracia and their son. The family, as before, made videos and posted happy photos. But 2 years later, this fairy tale ended. In November 2022, after a thorough investigation by detectives, Andrew Rabila was officially arrested and charged with the murder of his own mother. Andrew and Gracia displayed a glamorous lifestyle on social media. Their income consisted of money received from advertising contracts, sponsorships, as well as the use of credit cards. Gracia earned money on her own, while Andrew lied to her about his cryptocurrency business. He claimed that he earned considerable sums, but this money was supposedly frozen or would only become available in the future. In reality, however, Andrew had only huge credit card debts and nothing more. He continued to lie to Gracia about his income, maintaining a luxurious lifestyle. Being in a relationship with a popular model, Andrew felt the need to prove his financial viability to her. That is why he took out several life insurance policies on his mother, made himself the sole heir, and then cold-bloodedly killed Colin. And if he had managed to carry out this terrible plan, he could have passed off part of the money as cryptocurrency profits, thereby confirming his status as a successful businessman. Unfortunately, a considerable amount of time passed between the moment of Colin's death and the start of the police investigation into the murder case, so the officers were unable to find any surveillance camera footage in that area. However, they found very detailed records of how Andrew had contacted several insurance companies after his mother's death. Every time an insurance company refused to pay Andrew, he found a way to get around it, usually with the help of forged documents. In fact, he was exposing himself at every step. Andrew falsified the will, medical certificates, the coroner's report, but did not stop there. It was found that he used artificial intelligence to create a fake voice message from Colin's psychologist. In addition, Andrew told the court that his mother was very worried about approaching her 60th birthday, so she wanted to take out insurance to provide for her children and grandchildren financially. One of the detectives told the court that when examining Andrew's laptop, he found that all of his internet activity from December 2019 to July 2020 had been deleted. However, Andrew did not erase his Google search queries, which included queries about the causes of aneurysms, documents, and investigations. Analysis of the digital data also showed that Andrew's phone was connected to cellular towers near his mother's house at the time she likely died. This indicates that at the time of the woman's death, Andrew was somewhere nearby. In addition, witnesses were found who saw a white SUV parked near Colin's house at around 1 p.m. on May 25. Colin took her youngest son to work at 10 a.m. and then immediately returned home. At 2 p.m., she still had not left the house, which meant that the woman died between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. There is ample evidence and indications that Andrew was with his mother at this time. Gracia's testimony, as well as the fact that Andrew's phone hit the coverage area of the nearest cell towers several times, and his SUV was seen near Colin's house. It was especially suspicious that the woman died a few weeks after Andrew took out 3 life insurance policies. The prosecution argued that Andrew had arranged everything in such a way that Colin's death would look as natural as possible. He acted very carefully, but still made a few mistakes. In the photographs taken by the police immediately after the discovery of Colin's body, it was seen that the woman was lying by the shower. She had makeup on her face, jewelry around her neck, a gold watch on her wrist, and she was dressed. Colin had not let her hair down, and the mat that she usually put in the bathtub was lying on the floor. It all looked unnatural and did not look like the woman was going to take a shower in that state. As her daughter said, her mother always took off her jewelry and watch in her room, pinned up her hair, and only then went to the bathroom and turned on the shower. In court, Andrew denied his guilt in the murder of his mother, but admitted that he had taken out 3 insurance policies in Colin Rabila's name and then forged documents to receive the payments. Andrew's lawyers put forward various versions of the cause of death, including cardiac arrhythmia or even a brain aneurysm. However, the coroner's inability to determine the exact cause of death complicated the case, and it came to be based on circumstantial evidence. In December 2024, the jury unanimously found Andrew Rabila guilty of murdering his mother. His father Anton, who was present in court, was clearly upset by this news. His reaction was stronger than Andrew's, who showed almost no emotion. The measure of Andrew's punishment will only become known in April 2025, as he did not admit guilt. He faces life imprisonment without the right to early release. It is known that after Andrew's arrest, the media portrayed Gracia very negatively, and it was difficult for her to get through this period, because she also became a victim of deception. Gracia remains popular, as before, and maintains pages on social networks. She has found a new man with whom she is raising her son Romeo together. The horrific incident shook the state of Pennsylvania in October 2008. A man with a gunshot wound to the head was found right within the walls of a church. Even seasoned detectives were shocked by the circumstances of this case. Joseph Musanti sat dead at the pastor's desk. At first glance, it looked like a suicide. Joe left behind his wife Cindy, with whom he had been married for 18 years, as well as a daughter and a son. Ruscobb, the sister of the deceased, rushed to the small town of Reedsville in Pennsylvania as soon as she learned about her brother's death. The woman refused to believe that Joe had voluntarily taken his own life. The farewell to Joe was quiet, attended only by the closest circle. After the funeral, Ruscobb visited the house where her brother had lived with his family in recent years. She was surprised by the emptiness in the home. None of Joe's colleagues or friends came to support the widowed Cindy Musanti or express their condolences and comfort. Ruscobb asked Cindy about their life with Joe. During the conversation, the widow mentioned their family pastor, Arthur Burton Shermer. Ruscobb noticed how Cindy's eyes lit up when she spoke of this man of God. Since Cindy worked as a secretary at the church, there was no doubt that she had feelings for the pastor, which people around knew about and condemned. From Cindy, Ruscobb learned that just 3 months ago, Arthur had lost his wife Betty in a car accident. The vehicle crashed into a guardrail due to a deer that ran onto the road. Betty's injuries were incompatible with life. Further conversation revealed that Betty was Arthur's second wife, and his first wife Joanne had also died under mysterious circumstances. She fell down the stairs and hit her head. Arthur Shermer's biography alarmed Ruscobb, and she viewed the series of deaths of his wives with suspicion. Was such a thing even possible, Ruscobb wondered. It's hard to imagine what Samantha Musanti, Joe and Cindy's eldest daughter, had to go through. As a teenager, she accidentally stumbled upon a message from the pastor, where he confessed his love to her mother. The frightened Samantha understood that her father Joe would be furious. Joe, who was a carpenter and had struggled with alcoholism all his life, had brought his family to the church and Pastor Shermer himself in search of help. He assisted with renovations at the church, making wooden furniture, tables, chairs, benches, and shelves, while his own home fell into disrepair. Upon learning of her mother's affair, Samantha anonymously wrote to the pastor, begging him to end the relationship with a married woman. A few weeks later, Arthur and Cindy figured out who had sent the letter. They denied the affair to Samantha, so the girl had to pretend that she believed her mother. When Joe began to suspect his wife's infidelity, Samantha told him about her mother's relationship with the pastor. The shocked Joe confronted his wife, and she promised to stop communicating with Arthur, but a few days later, he found out that Cindy had secretly called the pastor. The day before Joe's death, on October 28, 2008, Cindy took the children to her sister's house, forbidding anyone to answer Joe's calls. The man called his daughter several times, and at night he left her a voice message, "Daughter, if you love me even a little, please call me back." But Samantha listened to it only in the morning, when her father was no longer alive. The Pennsylvania police immediately launched an investigation. All the facts indicated Joe died. Detective Jim Wagner joined the case. He carefully examined the evidence and details that confirmed the police's version: the absence of blood traces at the scene, glass shards on the soles of Joe's shoes. It appeared that the man had entered the church by breaking the glass doors, walked to the hall, and sat down at the pastor's wooden desk, which he had recently crafted with his own hands. There, Joe took out a gun and shot himself in the head. Arthur Shermer and Cindy Musanti had ironclad alibis. The pastor was an hour's drive away from the church, while Cindy was staying overnight at her sister's. Immediately after Joe's death, Arthur Shermer was excommunicated from the church. Detective Jim Wagner became interested in the priest's biography, particularly the information about the death of his second wife Betty just 3 months prior. The police considered Betty's death a tragic accident on the road. No autopsy was conducted, the body was cremated within a day after the accident, and the case was closed. It all started on the morning of July 15, 2008. According to Arthur, Betty experienced severe dental pain. The man decided to urgently take her to the hospital. Arthur got behind the wheel, while Betty took the passenger seat. They raced to the hospital, with Arthur driving on the highway at a speed of 85 kilometers per hour. Suddenly, a deer jumped onto the road. Arthur sharply turned the steering wheel to the right, the car skidded and crashed into a fence. Soon, another car stopped nearby. A man named Stan Dickerson approached to ask Arthur if everything was all right. He replied indifferently that he was fine, but his wife seemed to have serious problems. Stan noticed a lot of blood inside the car. The unconscious woman was sitting in the front seat. Dickerson called an ambulance, which arrived within a few minutes. Betty was taken to the hospital. Her sisters also rushed there. The doctors informed them that the woman's injuries were incompatible with life. A day later, Betty was disconnected from life support and passed away. Julie and Amy, Arthur's daughters from his first marriage to Joanne, were saddened by the tragic news, as they had a good relationship with their stepmother. They had no idea that their father might be hiding something. Arthur and Betty had been married for 7 years. They met 2 years after Joanne's death. Arthur assured that Betty was not just his second wife, but also a close friend and support. Immediately after Betty's death at the hospital, the coroner asked Pastor Arthur to describe the details of the accident. The man repeated his version of events. A deer suddenly ran onto the road, he got scared and lost control of the car, crashing into the fence. There was a loud sound, the car started spinning and flipping over, and Betty was thrown to the side. According to Arthur, his wife was not wearing a seat belt, which was the reason for her injuries. The case was quickly closed, with Betty's death being considered an accident. Arthur told his daughters a slightly different story. Allegedly, Betty was initially buckled up, but at some point complained that the seat belt was pressing too tightly and making it difficult to breathe, so she unbuckled it. And at that very moment, the deer appeared on the road. But to Betty's sisters, the man said something completely different, that lately, his wife had not been using a seat belt at all when getting into the car. Supposedly, she was just playing around, waiting for the car to emit a warning signal. "It's crazy, I know it was not at all like Betty, but that's exactly how it happened," Arthur insisted. Betty's body was cremated just a day after her death. The woman's close friends were so grief-stricken that it never even occurred to anyone to ask questions or suspect anything. It was only 4 months later that Detective Jim Wagner noticed a strange detail in that fatal car accident. He carefully studied the case files, especially the photographs from the scene. The images showed no traces of skidding, areas of uncontrolled tire rotation, or signs of braking. The car, except for the damaged front part, was in quite good condition. The airbags did not deploy, indicating a low-speed impact, while the vehicle itself was fully functional. Arthur could have easily reversed and taken his wife to the hospital. However, Betty's head injury turned out to be so severe that it did not correspond at all to the described type of accident. Moreover, the detective noticed unusual blood stains on the passenger seat. It seemed that the blood had soaked into the seat too quickly. "If I were in a car that was being thrown from side to side, blood could be anywhere, but certainly not on my seat," Detective Wagner explained. The fact that the blood had penetrated the seat so deeply could only mean one thing: Betty, already wounded and bleeding, had been placed in the car even before the accident. After this, the detective delved into the circumstances of the death of Schirmer's first wife, Joanne, who died on April 23, 1999. The woman was waxing the floor on the stairs in their house, tripped, fell, and hit her head. Arthur was not at home at the time, he had gone for a run. When he returned, the man found his wife unconscious, in a pool of blood at the foot of the stairs. He immediately called an ambulance, and Joanne was taken to the hospital, but a few hours later, without ever regaining consciousness, she died. The doctors suspected that the woman had suffered a heart attack. However, the medical examiner who conducted the autopsy refuted this version. Joanne's heart turned out to be completely healthy. She had multiple skull fractures but no other serious injuries, particularly below the neck, were actually found. If Joanne had indeed fallen down the stairs, she would have sustained other injuries as well, so the medical examiner determined the cause of death as undetermined. Such ambiguity could indicate the possibility of murder. The expert insisted on an immediate investigation by the police, but for some reason, this never happened. Both Arthur and his two daughters were convinced that Joanne had simply fallen down the stairs and died. So in 1999, the case was closed. It was only in December 2008 that Detective Wagner and his team obtained a warrant to search the house where Arthur and Betty lived. The investigators found important evidence. On the concrete floor in the garage, the detective noticed old blood stains. Using luminol, a special chemical substance, they were able to trace a bloody trail stretching from the back door of the house to the car in the garage, specifically to the front passenger seat. Further analysis showed that it was Betty's blood. This could only mean one thing: even before getting into the car, the woman already had a serious wound and was heavily bleeding. While Jim Wagner's team was searching the priest's house, the Pennsylvania State Police were interrogating Pastor Schirmer himself. Arthur denied that Betty had ever bled in their garage. But suddenly, the man seemingly remembered that shortly before her death, his wife had indeed been injured. According to him, they were carrying firewood together from the garage and stacking it in a shed in the backyard. And at the bottom of the wood pile were old newspapers. The detective noticed the issue date of those newspapers, September 2008. This meant that they had ended up in the woodshed after Betty's death. A year passed. Arthur Schirmer continued his relationship with the widowed Cindy Musanti. At first, he simply spent every weekend at the woman's house, and then he moved in with her altogether. By that time, Samantha Musanti, Cindy's eldest daughter, had turned 18 and moved out from her mother's place. Soon, the girl learned that Arthur was suspected of murder and was under investigation. In the summer of 2010, the pastor proposed to Cindy and gave her an engagement ring. The woman agreed to become his wife. This news greatly saddened Samantha. The girl feared that her mother might suffer the same fate as Arthur's previous wives. The daughter tried to warn her mother about the danger, but Cindy, blinded by her love for the priest, did not want to listen to anything. Law enforcement realized that they could not delay. And already in September 2010, just a few weeks after Arthur proposed to Cindy, he was arrested and charged with the murder of his second wife, Betty. Since the woman's body was cremated after her death and no autopsy was performed, the investigators decided to question Dr. Wayne Ross, who had conducted the autopsy of Arthur's first wife, Joanne, back in 1999. He was also asked to examine Betty's medical records made after the fatal accident. Using X-rays, Dr. Ross created a 3D model of Betty's injuries. It was striking that they were identical to Joanne's wounds. "Let's think logically," the doctor noted. "How likely is it that two women will marry the same man, receive virtually identical torn wounds to the right side of the head, both die from craniocerebral injuries under mysterious circumstances? In my opinion, the probability of this is minuscule." A few months after Schirmer's arrest, Dr. Ross, accompanied by investigators, visited the pastor's house where his first wife Joanne had suffered fatal injuries. They wanted to check on-site Arthur's version that the woman had caught her foot on a step, fallen, and hit her head. Using mannequins, the investigators simulated falling down the stairs dozens of times, analyzing exactly how Joanne could have received the fatal injury. Dr. Ross concluded that the nature of the woman's wounds did not correspond to the voiced scenario. In his opinion, she was hit on the head with something like a pipe or a crowbar. The pastor's lawyer, Brendan Reich, insisted on the accidental nature of both women's deaths and called the mannequin experiment on the stairs complete nonsense. To stage a realistic experiment, you would need a living person, but no one is going to risk a real life in this way, the defender argued. However, after completing all the examinations, Joanne's death was officially recognized as murder. Arthur and Joanne's daughters refused to believe that their father could have killed their mother. And medical examiners determined that the woman had been hit on the head about 14 times. In September 2012, Schirmer, who was already in custody for Betty's murder, was also accused of killing Joanne. The first trial was for Betty's case. The pastor's lawyer did everything possible to protect his client, insisting on the complete absence of a motive to kill his wife. Arthur himself denied guilt and did not shed a single tear throughout the proceedings. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell only the truth. On January 8, 2013, almost 4 years after Betty's death, Arthur Schirmer stood trial. The prosecutor called the former pastor an evil monster and stated that his entire life had been a complete deception. The key evidence against Schirmer included Betty's blood stains in the garage, the blood-soaked front passenger seat, and a stop valve found on the front panel of the car, which miraculously did not break during the accident. No one knew for sure if a deer had actually run onto the road, as there were no traces of a collision with an animal. Many were also shocked by the fact that Arthur had cremated his wife's body and placed the ashes in an urn with a deer image on it. It all resembled a grim, not at all funny joke. A woman testified in court, confessing to a secret long-term affair with Arthur. They met in church at a time when she was going through a difficult period and was particularly vulnerable. Arthur took advantage of this. He met with his mistress in a hotel, and although such encounters were infrequent, about 3 times a year, they lasted for several years in a row. They were bound only by passion, nothing more. The woman knew that the pastor was married. In court, Arthur did not deny adultery. He explained that due to menopause, Betty had not been interested in intimacy for several years. Therefore, he had to regularly watch porn and occasionally seek solace on the side to satisfy his male needs. The jury deliberated for an hour and a half. As a result, 64-year-old Arthur Schirmer was found guilty of the intentional murder of his second wife, Betty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Cindy Musanti was not involved in Betty's death. She was only reproached for bringing Arthur into the house shortly after the death of her husband Joseph, which became a serious psychological trauma for her daughter and son, who had just lost their father. Betty's sisters breathed a sigh of relief when Schirmer was punished, but at the same time, they realized that it would not bring back either Betty or Joe Musanti. Probably, if it weren't for Ruskob, the sister of the deceased Joe, who did not believe in his suicide and drew attention to the pastor's figure, no one would have even mentioned Arthur Schirmer. Only his daughters and Cindy, who fiercely defended her lover during the trial, supported him. And although they never officially married, the woman considers herself Schirmer's wife. Cindy closely communicates with his daughters, helps take care of the grandchildren, and they have become family to each other. But Cindy hardly contacts her eldest daughter, Samantha. What is my relationship with my mother? None. She has become a stranger to me. This is no longer the mom who raised me. I wish Cindy would finally see Arthur's true face, see who he really is, the girl shares. The case of the murder of Arthur Schirmer's first wife, Joanne, is still open, and the investigation continues. Cindy Musanti invariably supports Arthur and is 100% convinced of the pastor's innocence. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.